Hi, I'm Ian McLeod, one of the two directors of Imagine Australia and New Zealand. You found the video because you're thinking very seriously about joining us in New Zealand or Australia, or you're just at the early stages of trying to make a decision. So we've put together this video, which I hope is going to provide you with a good source of information, and in the next 60 minutes or so, you're going to learn an awful lot about the different visa pathways. But let's just start off with who we are and what we do. I'm a government licensed immigration advisor, and we've got offices in Auckland, New Zealand, and Melbourne, Australia. And we help people from all around the world with their visitor, student, work, and resident visas. So we run the whole gamut of visa possibilities for those people. Understanding, of course, that you all have different reasons for wanting to come to New Zealand or Australia. It could be simply for a visit. It could be to study as an international student. It could be to work for 12 or 24 months or a few years. Or, of course, it could be to settle here on a more permanent basis. There's around 15 of us in the company at the current time, and most of the people working here have been doing this work for many years. I think it's fair to say we're experts in the field. So what exactly do we do? Well, there's really two aspects to it. There's the legal representation, the interfacing between you as a migrant who doesn't really want to guess what they need to do, and the immigration officials who are sitting in judgment often on where you and your children spend the rest of your life. So it all starts, from my perspective, with an eligibility assessment. And we offer that for free. Requires you to complete a form, only takes 5 or 10 minutes, especially if you attach a CV. And in return for giving us that information, we're going to provide you with all the headline visa pathways available to achieve your goal, whether it's residency, study, work, or whatever. No cost for that. It's worth repeating. And that comes in a written format. It's a return email. And then if you decide that the prospects look good, then you can book a consultation with us. Now, most of the time, people are charged a fee for that consultation. Tends to last around 90 minutes. And that's where we get down into the strategic weeds. We outline all the available visa pathways and what you need to do to secure it. So we're talking about timelines, process, how employable you might be if that's relevant to your situation, how your investments must be made if you're looking to come into New Zealand under one of the investment pathways. Costs, of course, how much does everything cost, and what are the risks that you need to plan for? Then, once you've decided you want to engage with us and go through the process, you can then retain us. We are employed by you, frankly, to protect you from the bureaucrats on the other side of the visa processing counter. And we will then prepare and lodge and process, and where we need to, advocate and argue for why the government of New Zealand or Australia is going to give you that visa, whether they like it or not. And that's a very important point in terms of the value that we bring to the process. When we file a visa application, it is decision ready, and we are not seeking the opinion of that immigration official on what they think about what the outcome should be. We've been around long enough to know the immigration rules better than the people on the other side of the counter. We are controlling the flow of information, and we don't really care what their opinion is. They are going to give you the visa, and our success rate suggests they do. And on that score, we've moved around 30,000 people, 30, over the last 37 years to New Zealand and Australia. And tens of thousands more have obtained temporary visas along the way, the visitor visas, the work visas, the student visas. Our success rate for those people under the skilled migrant pathway who manage to secure skilled employment, which is the majority of our clients, is in excess of 99.8%. We really do know what we're doing. But there's more to immigration than the legal side of it. It is emotional. It is logistically complicated. And along the way, we're providing our clients with advice, support, and information. And a couple of examples spring to mind. We're opening bank accounts for you before you get to New Zealand, for example. So it's ready and waiting when you need to get here and start moving money and spending it. We are New Zealanders. We are Australians. Some of the team are migrants themselves. They've climbed the mountain you're contemplating climbing. And that gives us an insight and allows us to provide you with information and support. Health insurance or not health insurance, public education versus private education. How do I get a tax number? What's my opinion on living in this suburb or that suburb? Is $10,000 too much to pay for a 10-year-old Toyota Camry? So it's twofold. It's the legal representation once we've assessed you positively, and it's also the support, the advice and information to help you stay sane, as it appears at times the governments of Australia and New Zealand are trying to drive you bananas. I'm not sure if it goes without saying, but migration is usually very stressful for people. It's emotionally taxing. You're talking about leaving your friends, your family, your social networks, your sports club, your mates down at the golf club, everything you know, your employment often, for something you hope is going to be better for you and your family. And you need to get ready for it. I would go further and say it's logistically incredibly complicated. You're talking about packing up your lives on one side of planet Earth and joining us here on the other side. It takes planning, it takes execution. There's a time for everything, and you need to understand the order of events. And we're going to provide you with that information and support. And I guess it goes without saying it is legally complicated. We wouldn't exist if it were otherwise. Here we are after 37 years, still going strong. So getting visa applications right first time is critical, if for no other reason than they are incredibly expensive. To apply for a resident visa of New Zealand for a family today is $6,500 New Zealand dollars in government application fees. If you blow it and you don't get approved, they don't give you back your money. In Australia, a family of 4, you're staring down the barrel of around 12,000 New Zealand dollars. So it is stressful. It's logistically complicated. And legally, no government is going to give you residency if you get the process 98% right. They don't reward you for getting it almost right. You get residency because you got the process 100% right. And the second thing is it's not going to be cheap. And most of our clients, but by no means all, I would describe as married, mortgaged, middle class, 2 children, living in the suburbs, white-collar professionals. But having said that, we have a lot of young clients in their 20s and 30s, and we look after a lot of parents moving to Australia primarily, and some coming to New Zealand as well. And generally, it's the poorer you are, very often, the more you want to migrate, because it's an economic need to try and build a future. But the sad reality is, the poorer you are, the less you can afford it. So you've got to be able to budget and finance the move over many, many months, if not years. The next point I would make is that this whole presentation is a reality check. We are known for not telling people what we think they want to hear, but what they need to know. You can make a balanced decision on whether you're up for it, you can afford it, and you believe you've got everything it takes to get up the visa mountain you are contemplating. And I would take a minute and pause, take a second and pause, because I like to paint the picture of migration being like climbing Mount Everest. It's not Kilimanjaro for you, those of you in Africa. It's not Mont Blanc for those of you in Europe. It's not Denali or McKinley in the US. This is Mount Everest, and you're standing underneath it looking up, telling yourselves you'd quite like to climb it. But the truth is, it's way beyond the means of most people, financially, emotionally, and even logistically. The planning, the preparation, the execution. So this is all about a bit of a reality check and ensuring you do this thing with your eyes very, very wide open. And here's my last point, and this is always a bit of a shock to the Australian population, but Australia is not perfect, and nor is New Zealand. Both countries have social issues, economic issues. We're going through the same cost of living issues that you're all going through at the moment. We've got to be aware of that. You don't leave all your economic or social feelings behind, or problems behind, when you migrate to New Zealand or Australia. Migration is a compromise. And there'll be a great number of things that you love about New Zealand or Australia, and there'll be other things that you're going to miss, that you're going to give up. And you need to be aware of it, And we're going to be very compassionate, but at the same time, realistic, blunt, and honest about your chances on all sorts of different levels. Now, many of you who are going to be migrating to New Zealand are going to need a job offer, a skilled job offer, to make it happen. And those of you going to Australia, some of you are going to qualify without needing a job offer, and some of you are going to go down a work to residence pathway. So the very first question that people ask when they know they need a job to achieve the residency visa outcome is, well, how do I get one? How do I get one when every time I go online and I look for jobs on major platforms, I see the jobs that I can do, but overwhelmingly I'm told I need to have a work visa or residency or not to bother applying for the job, when in reality you can't get the work visa if you don't already have the job. So that chicken and egg, that paradox, it drives people absolutely bananas. And while I don't have a magic wand to make that disappear, it is real, and it doesn't really matter what you do, you will experience that to a greater or lesser extent. How do you go about getting a job if you don't have that work visa or residency? Well, over my 37 years, I've identified 4 key drivers that determines the speed with which my clients are going to get work. And here's the first one. Overwhelmingly, employers want you to be in New Zealand or in Australia when you're applying for the job. Why does that make a difference? Well, it makes a difference because you're sending a very strong signal that you are committed, you are serious, and you are available. And if you're sitting at home in Johannesburg or New York or Beijing or London, and you're firing off applications and you're wondering why no one is terribly interested, it's because they know you're not here, they know you're not available, and of course, they know you don't have a work visa. So the second key driver is English. And I often quip at this point, if you're having any trouble understanding my cute New Zealand accent, you're in deep trouble, because English is the language of commerce, of education, of everyday living, shopping. And of course, it's the same in Australia. And so getting jobs, in my experience, is about a lot more than the skills you bring or even skill shortages. It's what you sound like when you open your mouth. And if I put you in charge of that team of people in a management role or in a customer-facing role, if you can't be understood or you can't understand, then you're simply not a good choice to fill that vacancy. So English language is critical. The third is what I call cultural compatibility. And I don't want to be offensive, but how well you fit into the environment in which you wish to work is often critical to the decision that's made to employ you or not. And not all of you are instant New Zealanders or instant Australians, but those of you that come from the former or current British Commonwealth, we've got an awful lot in common culturally. We probably went through an education system that's broadly similar to Australia and New Zealand. Universities will be very similar. Our values, our standards, our laws are by and large based on the British. And so that means there's an immediate familiarity. And for those of you coming from former British colonies, and I include the US in that, I know it was a long time ago, but I include the US in that, New Zealand and Australia don't represent some great cultural learning curve. It's not like if I move to Japan or South Korea, where I've got to learn a whole new way of doing things, of values, and not eating on the subway, for example. It's not really like that when you come to New Zealand and Australia, if you're from one of those sorts of countries. I should add, I include Hong Kong in that. I include Singapore in that, and Malaysia for sure. So we have an awful lot in common culturally. But the more different you are culturally from the dominant cultures in New Zealand and Australia, it can be harder to get work. And the fourth is resilience. Because when you are in New Zealand or Australia and you're applying for jobs and being rejected, day after day after day, it can become very dispiriting very quickly. It can become very expensive very quickly. So these are the 4 drivers, more than being on a skills shortage list, for example, that determines the speed with which our clients get work. Now, only around 15% of our clients manage to find employment in New Zealand or Australia without being in the country when they are applying. Only 15%. Yet around 95% of our clients who come, put in the time and the effort, and who've got the financial wherewithal to see the process through, get jobs if they speak fluent English and they're a good cultural fit. So if you're going to sit at home and fire off CVs into the ether, don't be surprised if it doesn't work. And if you're going down a pathway, a residency pathway that demands employment, you've got to be prepared to put in the hard yards and accept a degree of risk that you may spend 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 months in New Zealand or Australia without your partner, without tucking your kids into bed at night, possibly not having an income. If you're not prepared to do it, I'd suggest you turn the video off and go and watch some Netflix, because you probably won't be moving to New Zealand or Australia anytime soon. It is worthy to note that in New Zealand, you are quite entitled legally to work remotely if your current employer will allow you to do so in New Zealand. And you can spend up to 9 months in New Zealand on a visitor or tourist visa. And a lot of my clients are now moving to New Zealand, particularly the IT people, accountants, a lot of marketing, social marketing type people. And they're basically bringing their jobs with them. Now, you cannot use that job as the basis for your residency visa. But what it does allow you to do is to buy time before you run out of money. I would say also, in terms of skill shortage lists, and New Zealand has 2, Australia doesn't really have skill shortage lists, so don't go looking for them. But certainly in New Zealand, I think probably only 15 to 20% of our clients end up by getting jobs that lead to their residency visas that are on a skill shortage list. So the reality is, it's not the skill shortages that get you a job. It's what you sound like, it's your culture, it's how much money you've got in your pocket, and how resilient you really are. So getting employment should never be taken for granted. The higher the unemployment rate, the harder it's going to be to find work. But here's another very interesting point, and I reached this conclusion only 2 or 3 years ago. Even when the unemployment rate in New Zealand and Australia is very low, there's still generally a reluctance on the part of most employers to entertain those who don't already have work rights. And although these factors I've just shared with you, I think are the main ones, there is something else at play. And basically, New Zealand and Australia have very, very strong worker protection laws. It can be very difficult to fire people, and it can be a very long, laborious process. And if you're an employer, you may end up in front of an employment court judge. And overwhelmingly, these judges are on the side, if that's the right way of putting it, of the workers. And so a lot of employers, rather than take the risk on a foreign candidate, will desperately search for a local one, because they present, at least in their minds, a lower risk. So often the superior international candidate will miss out to the more inferior local candidate. But that's a reality you simply have to face. So now we're getting into the visa policies and processes. But before we get down in the weeds of that, I have 4 golden rules, tongue-in-cheek somewhat. But these are my experiences over 37 years, helping people stay sane and understand the complexities of these visa regimes in New Zealand and Australia. The first is this: when it comes to immigration policy, suspend logic. There is no logic. I've said earlier in this presentation, you are chosen by governments because governments are looking for certain things. It might be skills. It could be all sorts of different things. They set the agenda, and they are politicians. And immigration is political. You consider what's going on around the world today. Australia is making it increasingly difficult. In fact, Australia is having something of an identity crisis. They don't really know what a good immigrant is anymore. Here we are in 2026, now talking about selecting people not just about their skill sets or their linkages, their family linkages to Australia, but based on their values. Well, how on earth do you decide what the appropriate value is for Australia? But it's a really good point. We may now find Australia selecting people as much on their values as on what skills they bring, and that is political. The second, assume nothing about your eligibility. If you get this 98% right, you fail. No government is giving you 98% of a permanent residence visa. Think about it. So don't make any assumptions about your eligibility. In New Zealand in particular, the immigration rule book is actually a set of guidelines. In Australia, visa rules are legislative instruments. So the Australians are far more precise in what they mean with their rules. New Zealand, the rule book is riddled with the following statement: an immigration officer must be satisfied. unquote. And so there's much more leeway for an immigration officer to interpret the same rule in more than one way, or two immigration officers to interpret the same rule, or assess the same evidence in two different ways. So assume nothing about your eligibility. That's where we come in. Number 3, just when you think you understand the rules and you file your visa is going to be assessed by an immigration officer who does not know what they are doing. They don't know their rules. Or just before you file your visa, you might wake up and find that the government has just moved the goalposts. So time is of the essence. If you are assessed as being a good candidate, the risk that you have is between that day, if I say to you, yep, you're a great candidate, it's going to be many months before we're filing a resident visa application. It could be a year or two in New Zealand in particular. And if in that time the rules change, your strategy could collapse. And here's number 4. We live in the information age. We're now using Claude and Gemini and ChatGPT and the internet and Google to find information. And my advice to you is treat with great caution what you read online. There's nothing I share with people over 90 minutes having a detailed consultation about strategy and strategies that is not available for free online. In fact, there's nothing I'm telling you in this presentation that isn't available for free online. Yet how is it that more than 50% of all those who file over the last few years expressions of interest in residency with the governments of New Zealand or Australia never get it? Yet for us, our success rate, and on heart, is around about 99.8% over 37 years. How do we achieve that? How is it that people doing it themselves overwhelmingly fail? Well, these are your 4 reasons, my 4 golden rules. Assume nothing, suspend logic, understand that immigration officers often don't know their own rules. And in terms of living in the information age, it's great. Everything you ever want to know, in theory, you can find. But what can you trust? What can you believe? What is real and what is not? And when we take on residency visa clients, we very often provide a money-back guarantee on it. Well, ChatGPT won't be doing that. If you read the Immigration Department website, they won't be guaranteeing you're going to get your visa. So again, frankly and a little abruptly, the smartest people that we deal with are people who've done lots of research themselves, but the more they look, the more they read, the more websites they visit, the more confused they become about their eligibility. And those are the people that end up being represented by us. New Zealand and Australia operate what I would call both social and economic immigration policies. Now, I'm focusing very much from this point on those of you that want to come to New Zealand or Australia on a more permanent basis. And I'm going to cover off each of those in turn. The 3 super groups, or streams as I like to call them, are skilled migration, family-related migration, and business/investment-related migration. I'm going to talk in some detail about these in the following slides. So let's start off with partners. If you are in a genuine, stable relationship with an Australian and you want to live in Australia, or a resident visa holder, permanent resident or citizen of New Zealand, you've got options in terms of residency. In terms of the timelines and processes, it really depends how long you've been together and how robust the evidence is of those criteria: genuine relationship, stable relationship, and certainly in the case of New Zealand, the government makes a call on whether they think your relationship is likely to endure. Now think about that for a couple of seconds. How do you prove that your relationship is genuine and it's not you pulling the wool over New Zealand government's eyes to try and get somebody into New Zealand? How do you prove your relationship is stable and that you don't throw pots and pans at each other every night after work? And how on earth do you demonstrate that your relationship is likely to endure? Well, that's what you've got to do. And you've got to satisfy an immigration officer in either Australia or New Zealand that is the circumstance in which you and your partner exist. Now, you don't have to be in Australia or in New Zealand to apply for these residency class visas. And for many of you going to New Zealand or Australia, there are temporary work or visitor visa options available so that you can sit out the processing time in New Zealand or Australia. It's a really important point to note that you're not guaranteed anything just because you've shacked up with an Aussie or a New Zealander. And the onus is on you to prove that this relationship, using pieces of paper, is genuine, stable, and likely to endure. Both countries recognize same-sex or common law, so there's no requirement. Indeed, there's no real advantage in being married any longer in terms of these applications. So a marriage certificate in and of itself simply does not cut it when it comes to the evidence of the stability or genuineness of the relationship. It's cohabitation. It's interdependent financial circumstances. You're sharing your money. You're sharing the house. You're sharing the burdens of life and so on. So my very key advice, a very key point here is just because you're living with one of us doesn't entitle you to anything. And these are actually incredibly complicated applications, far more complicated than what most people expect. But if your relationship is, I'll say it once again, genuine, stable, and likely to endure, it's probably the least complicated of all the various residence class visa processes to either New Zealand or Australia. It's very common for our clients when they move to New Zealand to ask us the question, what about mum or dad? And the same thing happens across the Tasman in Australia. Both countries have got pathways for parents to secure residency. And I'm going to start off with Australia first. Australia offers two pathways. And frankly, one of them is really not even worth talking about because the processing time today, and I'm not making this up, is around 30 years. 30. So your parents will probably be dead by the time they get approved. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it. The second is called the contributory parent category. And very broadly, very high level, your parents must have the same or more adult children, ordinarily resident in Australia. So they must have permanent resident status in order to sponsor mum and dad. Beyond that, it really comes down to health and character. And if they have good health, and of course, the older we get, the more likely we're going to have some condition that might put a spanner in the visa works. Character is not generally an issue that we see on a day-to-day basis. Health is the big one. Parents can apply from within Australia, and there is provision for what they call a bridging visa, which means you can remain in Australia while the residency visa is being processed. Now, the contributory parent is also taking many, many years to float to the top of the immigration processing pile and to be processed and approved. So for a great number of parents considering a move to Australia, they will be allowed to remain in the country on a temporary visa, but they are on their own in terms of healthcare. There's no going to the government and seeking publicly funded health. There's no ability to get welfare or any form of state or government level support. So it's very much a case of make sure you've got enough money to tide you over until you become a resident many, many years after you apply, or your children, and in particular, the child who is sponsoring you, has got the wherewithal to take care of you, because that is very precisely what the Australian government is going to require. Now, New Zealand also has two pathways. The most common is literally a ballot. It's a lottery. Now, unlike Australia, where the parent or parents must have the same or more adult children living in Australia, New Zealand only requires a parent or parents to have one adult child living in New Zealand. And there's all sorts of rules around eligibility for that child to act as a sponsor. It can be income, it can be assets, it can be all sorts of things which I'm not going to go into here. But like Australia, there is a requirement that the sponsor takes responsibility for mum and or dad, not only while the visa is being processed to live here permanently, but for 10 years afterwards. And if the sponsor reneges, does not live up to the conditions of the sponsorship they signed up for, mum and dad's residency can be revoked. And in fact, as I record this, that is precisely what has happened with a client that we got residency for a few years ago. Following the grant of a resident visa, mum and dad went down to the welfare office and started drawing a benefit, that has caused their residency to potentially be revoked. So if you're going to act as sponsor here in New Zealand, you're on the hook for looking after mum and dad because they're not entitled to welfare while the sponsorship qualifying period remains in place. So it's a lottery. And the chances of being selected from this pool of candidates, of applicants, is probably around 5%. So chances are if you file an expression of interest as a parent to come to New Zealand, you're not going to be successful. There is a second pathway, and that is for parents who've got more money. So the first category I've just described, no minimum amount of money is required for the parent applicant. It falls on the sponsor. But for this one, it's more streamlined, I guess is the right word. So first point, the second pathway is not a lottery. It is a process where you file your application. And apart from health and character and having an eligible sponsor, there's 3 key criteria that you need to be aware of. Number 1, parent or parents must have net cash and or assets equivalent to 1.5 million New Zealand dollars. So a net worth of 1.5 million New Zealand dollars. The second criteria is that of that 1.5 million that has been nominated by parents, they must transfer and invest 1 million New Zealand dollars for a period of 4 years. Any income derived during that 4 years is the parents to keep. At the end of the 4 years, parents can do whatever they want with that $1 million. They cannot use it for personal use. So for example, mum and dad can't use the $1 million to go and buy a house. Certainly not a house they can live in. They can buy a house which they can rent out to generate an income, but they cannot live in the house as part of that 1 million. The third criteria is in the 12 months before immigration assesses eligibility, the parent or parents must have earned a gross salary or income, rather, they don't need to be working, of 60,000 New Zealand dollars. So parents can apply and usually do under this category from outside New Zealand. Processing times at the moment are around about 12 to 18 months. Residency is approved. In principle, funds are transferred and invested. Residency is approved, conditional residency. Mum and dad fly to New Zealand within normally 6 to 12 months, take up the residency, and after 4 years, when they present evidence that they have maintained their $1 million investment, the government lifts the condition that they do so from the resident visa, and they can then apply for a permanent resident visa. So we've got the $1.5 million mum and dads, and we've got the don't care how much money you've got mum and dads, but they go into a pool where they hope they've bought a winning ticket. Most of the clients that we represent moving to Australia do so under one of the multiple skilled migrant pathways. And Australia primarily has 2 options on the table. There's those people who have been able to secure skilled employment, who work in an occupation that is available for permanent residency of Australia, and who have an employer willing to sponsor the process over normally 2, 3, or 4 years. So we have what I would call work to residency. That is a non-points based system. And then Australia also has, under the general skilled migration, a points-based system, which I'll explain in a minute or two. Those migrants do not require jobs to get into Australia, but rather it's a points-tested process. But coming back to those people going down a work to residence pathway, Australia has what they call direct entry and what I would call work to residency. So direct entry is a relatively select number of highly skilled occupations whereby, having secured that job, you can actually file your permanent residency straight away. And in a perfect world, that would be processed and approved within a few weeks. You would fly to Australia and take up the job with permanent residency in your passport. The problem with that right now is the Australian Department of Home Affairs that processes immigration visas is taking around 12 months to process the so-called direct entry. So it's not direct entry at all, it's file and hurry up and wait. Now, very few employers, genuine employers of course, are going to wait 12 months for you to turn up. And therefore, you're now forced to secure a work visa to take up that job, what the Aussies call a subclass 482. Problem with that right now is they are taking 5 to 7 months to process a work visa for you to take up that job. Well, again, most employers are going to say, what? I'm not going to wait that long for you. But those are the timelines today, putting a real barrier in front of Australian employers when it comes to recruiting people from offshore. There are different sub-pathways depending on whether that job you've got is in a metropolitan area, Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, for example, or regional Australia. But the key point here is some of you will get a job, you'll be sponsored by an employer, whether you're direct entry or work to residency, you're going to need a work visa, and work visas have very different criteria to residency or permanent resident visas in Australia. So you need to understand what those differences are, what the costs are, what the timelines are. So to wrap that, not everyone with a job offer in Australia is presented a pathway to a permanent resident visa. It's very prescriptive, very evidence heavy, and there's a serious amount of responsibility on the employer to reassure the Australian government of many things, including they tried to fill the vacancy with an Australian. They are prepared to sign up to some fairly onerous obligations, financial, in return for being able to employ you. So they've got to make donation, for want of a better term, to industry training organisations in Australia. They've got to guarantee that if you decide after 6 months in Australia you don't much like it, they are required to fly you and the family back to wherever you want to go. So that's a really serious disincentive for Australian employers to go offshore. And I don't think that's any accident. Australia is a very union-dominated economy. The unions call a lot of the shots. And so successive governments, whether they're left-leaning, union-friendly, or right-leaning and less union-friendly, have absolutely kowtowed to the unions when setting these policies. So job offers, work to residency, direct entry is on the table for a lot of our clients, and a lot of occupations are really well suited for it, but generally only when the employer is very desperate to get someone into Australia. So that's your work to residency based on a job. Australia has the non-job based points system, and very, very broadly works like the federal government sets the rules, and the federal government says you must score at least 65 points to play the game. But then the federal government outsources a lot of the decision-making process to the state and territorial governments, and that's all to do with the politics and the economics of Australia. But consequently, every state and territorial government has its own residency policy for skilled migrants. They decide how many plumbers or primary school teachers or engineers that they want in the next 12 months. And so what that means for you in terms of how many points you require comes down to how many other people nominating your occupation are competing for a finite number of visas. So there's a finite number of visas available, for example, in the state of Victoria for primary school teachers. And therefore your point score, whether it's low, medium or high, is not really critical. It's how you compare to all those people you're competing with. And of course, if you're sitting there right now thinking, well, in about 6 months' time, I want to file a permanent resident visa application as a primary school teacher, you and we have no way of knowing how many other people are sitting on planet Earth thinking exactly the same thing. So in some ways, it's like a Dutch auction. And no one that does what we do for a living can tell you at this point of the process, if you're at the very beginning, how many points you need to get into Australia. Now, it's really important to appreciate it is not a lottery. There is science to it. And one of the things we do, and we monitor on an almost daily basis, is how many points did the last primary school teacher need to get into Victoria or Queensland or Western Australia. Now, that's no guarantee of what will happen next week or next month or in 6 months, but patterns do emerge. Trends are real. What makes it even more complicated is that each of these state governments has its own assessment process. Some of the state and territorial governments use the federal government's point system. Some have their own point system. Some have no point system. Just a whole lot of criteria you need to meet. And if that isn't complicated enough, some of the states are very transparent with their assessment criteria and others are completely opaque. South Australia tends to be rather transparent. If you tick the boxes, you're going to get approved. At the other end of the opacity spectrum is New South Wales. New South Wales never really publishes what they're looking for. Now, we, through experience, have got a very good idea of how many points any particular occupation requires to get in and what it is that that particular government is looking for. But it's no guarantee that you're going to be selected. So New South Wales operates something of a don't call us, we'll call you kind of a policy. And all the other 6 states that lie between South Australia and New South Wales have varying degrees of opacity. And in terms of the application process, it normally requires a skills assessment where you nominate an occupation, you present evidence to demonstrate you are qualified and experienced to be able to nominate that occupation. There is an English language exam, not mandatory for everybody, but because this is a points-based system and you get points for your English language ability, everybody goes and sits it. Points for your years of work experience, points for your age, points for state government nomination if it is required. And I should make clear that permanent residency comes in 2 flavors for Australia. Those of you who are or must be nominated by a state government, and those where the federal government might invite you to apply directly. But it's the same essential process. It's the same point system. So there's a lot of pre-visa application pieces of work that need to go into it. Some of you will require that state government support, others of you will not. Those of you that do, right now, it could be 6, 12, 18 months of waiting to see if one of those governments will decide to nominate you and your family. But as soon as they do, that automatically triggers the federal government to invite you to apply for either a permanent or a provisional residence visa. Now, I don't have the time without putting you to sleep right now to explain the difference between the permanent resident visa and the provisional, only to say both allow you and your family to live, work, go to school, enjoy the public health system, enjoy the public education system in the same way. So while a provisional visa is kind of halfway between temporary and permanent is literally unconditional, you have a lot more rights and access to Australian amenities, education and health on a provisional residence visa than you might have if you're going down that work to residence I've described earlier, or direct entry with a job. So the other thing I would add right now is that Australia is having something of an identity crisis when it comes to immigration. It is becoming increasingly political in Australia, this whole immigration question. And that's largely at the current time because Australia has not built the infrastructure or the houses to deal with the people and the population growth that they have. And as we're seeing all around the world in 2026, if as a politician you didn't see those problems coming or you don't have solutions, just blame the immigrants. So Australia has been trying to cut significantly the numbers of people they're granting temporary and permanent visas to. And so you're considering Australia at a time where it doesn't really know what it wants to do. It knows it needs people that are highly skilled, but the politics is preventing it from saying yes to as many people in the recent past. So our business has evolved, and it always evolves based on the politics around immigration and, of course, economic circumstances in Australia or New Zealand. But right now, there's a swing away from the points-based no job offer brigade to those going down the work to residence or direct entry on the basis of having skilled employment. Really importantly, don't misinterpret what I just said. We still have a lot of clients who are getting into Australia under the point system where they don't need a job, and they will travel to Australia with unconditional permanent residency or conditional provisional residency in their passport. It's still a good option for a lot of people. But the bottom line here is, all around the world, governments are shutting up shop because of the political consequences and implications of immigration. New Zealand has a number of different pathways for highly skilled people who've got jobs in New Zealand, and these are known as the Green List, point system, or a sector agreement. Very broadly, the Green List is those occupations the government would have you believe we have an acute shortage of. It has two substreams itself. We have Green List straight to residency, and we have Green List 2 years of work to residency. And depending on what job you get will determine whether you can file your resident visa immediately you have that job offer, or you need to work for 2 years first. My advice on Green List is do not be seduced if your occupation is on it. The Green List hasn't actually been updated significantly for nearly 4 years. And in that time, the labour market has changed enormously. So you need to do your own verification or check with somebody like us. How employable am I really? Because your government says you've got an acute shortage of my skills. So Green List is one pathway. It can be relatively quick for many, but beware being seduced, believing just because your occupation's on the Green List, you're highly employable. The most common pathway for people coming into New Zealand as skilled migrants is our current 6-point system. And under this system, you're going to get points for your qualifications, or the salary that comes with the job you get in New Zealand, or having New Zealand registration. So where you are required to secure statutory registration, think nurses, think doctors, physios, veterinarians, optometrists, psychologists, electricians, plumbers. So there's a whole lot of occupations where to do your work, you must first secure statutory registration. Depending on how long it takes a New Zealander to get that registration will determine how many points you get. And looking at qualifications, salary, or registration, and the points you get from that will then determine how long you must work to accrue your 6 points. Now today, the maximum is 3 years. All of that is going to change in August of this year, where the time that people are required to work in skilled employment is going to be reduced significantly. No one is going to have to work for more than 2 years. Many people can go directly and apply for residency if they have a qualification comparable to a New Zealand PhD or a master's degree that was studied and secured in New Zealand. Everybody else is going to be a combination of 1.5 to 2 years. So that's your point system. The third is sector agreements. So the government of New Zealand recognises, with a rapidly ageing population and relatively low salaries in some occupations, that we can find it very difficult to find enough people to work in aged care facilities or with disabled people, children, and so on. So the government created, a couple of years ago now, a 2-year work to residence pathway for people who have qualifying jobs in that sector. They've also added to that ferry boat skippers and deckhands, because apparently we have a shortage of them as well. So you've got those pathways. You've got to remember, not any job will qualify. It must be highly skilled. There is no list of what those occupations are, outside of the Green List, I should add. But if you want to know if what you do is skilled, you can't really consult any list on the government's website. You can use use other reference material that guides us on the skill level. So that's really, really important. Before you look to apply, find out if what you're doing today or in your recent past is likely to be skilled enough such that if you've got a similar job in New Zealand, your pathway to residency is open. In terms of the process to secure a resident visa as a skilled migrant, As soon as everybody realizes they need the job offer, the job is the key that unlocks the door, what they tend to do is to feverishly Google and start applying for jobs. That is very much putting the cart before the horse. To go back to my analogy of climbing Mount Everest, before you go near the mountain, get everything in your backpack you're going to need to climb it. And by that I mean secure visitor visas, work visas, student visas for the children, and resident visas. Now you can't apply for any of those just yet, but in terms of process, we spend a few months working with our clients, laying the foundation for the job search. For many of you, that will mean a mandatory English language exam. You don't score points for it. You must simply, and partner and children aged 16 or over, meet a minimum threshold for English. It's not an overly onerous level. It's basically proficient English. And if you're not having any trouble understanding me, you're probably proficient. And if you are having trouble understanding me, it could be curtains. Some of you will have qualifications, bachelor degrees or higher, that are automatically recognized within the visa system for your points. Others, it won't be recognized. So you now have an additional piece of work that needs to be done, which is getting your qualifications assessed by the New Zealand government. For many of you, getting this job is going to mean being in New Zealand, as I've alluded to on another slide. And that may mean a visitor visa to travel to New Zealand, or it may mean you can travel without a visa and get a visa on arrival. This is where things start getting complicated because you're supposed to be a tourist. Now, while it is perfectly legal to come to New Zealand as a tourist and apply for work, what is not legal is to mislead an immigration officer. And those can be two very uncomfortable bedfellows, because applying for a visitor visa, if you're completely honest about it, you may well get an immigration officer deciding, no, you're not a genuine tourist, I'm not giving you the visa. If you lie, on the other hand, and say, I'm coming on vacation only, you're actually exposing yourself later on in the process to an accusation that you misled the immigration department because you were coming to find a job. So kind of damned if you do and damned if you don't, if you're not very careful. So how that visitor visa is presented is very, very critical to many of you in what happens down the line. So visitor visa or visa free to come to New Zealand. Most of you will be granted up to 9 months in New Zealand. So you've got 9 months to find your job, run out of enthusiasm, run out of money, whatever comes first. And as soon as you've secured the job, we then need to decide as your legal advisors, is this green list? Can we file residency immediately and avoid the next stage of work and student visas for the family? Or are you going down a more work to residency pathway, demanding work visas and student visas for any children to go to school? And again, it gets even more complicated because overwhelmingly work visas are granted only once the government is satisfied that the employer has made a genuine effort to recruit locally but cannot do it or should not be able to do it. Now that, frankly, is a silly word game. I don't think I've ever been able to not get the information I need from an employer that makes you the only suitable applicant, which is the requirement for a work visa. Of course, you got the job because you were the best applicant. But if you present a work visa application to Immigration New Zealand where the employer says you were the best applicant, Immigration can quite legitimately decline that visa if they believe a New Zealander should have been able to do the job. Work visas that you get initially will be specific to the employer that has offered you the job. Processing time to get it, if we're doing it, between 4 and 6 weeks normally. Highly skilled work visas are valid for 5 years. Partners will receive their own work visa, valid for 5 years, and partners have unconditional work rights. Now, not all partners get these work visas, but most of our clients' partners do. Children will be eligible to attend school as domestic students, and they too will have 5-year student visas. So then once you have done your time, your 1.5 years, your 2 years, or you can apply immediately through a straight to residence option, you file an expression of interest. It will be very high level assessed. If it looks credible, you'll be invited to apply for residency. I scrunched up my face there because I don't think really immigration thinks too hard about all of that these days. People are just invited to apply. You then have 3 months to file your decision-ready visa application, and over the next few weeks or months, it'll be processed and your residence will be approved. So it's job offer, normally to people in New Zealand. Most of you will need a work visa to buy enough time to become eligible to apply for residency. Now, note of caution. When you have to work for 1 or 2 years before you become eligible to apply for residence, this is not a process without risk. What happens if you get desperately ill along the way? What happens if you lose your job? What happens if World War III breaks out? You have no guarantee while you're sitting on a work visa that you are going to get residency. You are on a pathway that leads to a door called a resident visa. But the day you unlock that door, you need to hope the rules haven't changed and your circumstances haven't changed. Now, I don't believe any government would make any retrospective changes. If you're on a work visa and you woke up in a year's time and you could only apply for residency a few months after that 1 year, and the government decided to change the rules completely, whilst legally they can do that, and you don't have a leg to stand on in terms of arguing that these changes shouldn't apply to you, I don't believe there would be too many New Zealand governments that would actually make that change and not put in place some kind of sunset clause, some sort of transitional process whereby those who are on that pathway will still be eligible to apply. But really important to understand, until the day dawns when you file your resident visa, you are not safe, not completely safe, and there are still risks attached to your eligibility. New Zealand offers 2 pathways to those people with money. One is the business investor category. This is designed for those people who wish to buy or buy into an existing New Zealand business. Minimum investment is 1 million New Zealand dollars and is granted to somebody who has presented a viable and credible plan around what they want to do, that they have got enough money to make the investment in New Zealand, to demonstrate they have lawfully earned or acquired that money, amongst a whole lot of other criteria. It's a 2 visa process, and it begins with a business investor work visa, which is granted following application and presentation of all the evidence that you've got at least $1 million to buy into your business. You've got another $500,000 on top of that by way of settlement support. You are under the age of 55 when this 4-year self-employed work visa is issued. And the business that you buy must have been in existence for at least 5 years. It must, when you buy it, employ at least 5 full-time equivalent staff. Over the course of operating your business, and operate it you must do, there's no installing a manager to run it for you, you must create a 6th job for a New Zealander as well. So it's initially a 4-year self-employed work visa by any other name. You will own and operate that for at least 3 years. And the 4th year, one must assume, is going to be spent processing the resident visa that follows a decision-ready application that is likely to be approved. So on the face of it, looks pretty good. There's a number of exclusions in terms of the kinds of businesses that you can buy. No retail, no, dare I say, sexual provision services, nothing related to tobacco, nothing related to liquor. So we're being all very pure, but the whole idea here is these are established businesses, not one-man band at noodle shops or convenience stores, that kind of thing. It's a pretty good option if you do have some experience, or you find a really good business that you think you can take up a notch over a 3 to 4 year period. I think the biggest risk with this is that you must present your visa application with an actual business that you want to buy or buy into. We're not yet certain how long processing times are going to be. This is very much a brand new policy at the time I'm recording this, but I'm imagining 3 to 5 months to process a decision-ready visa application, which allows you then to go through with the purchase of this property. And you're going to have to keep a vendor interested and motivated long enough for you to get your visa, because it would be insane for you to buy this business without any guarantee of getting this visa. And this is, while it's a new policy, it's actually a reworked older policy that was dumped a few years ago. And that was always the biggest challenge. Not so much identifying a business that you want to buy or buy a part of, but getting that vendor to stay motivated long enough for you to get your visa. But for those of you under the age of 55, it's not a bad option if you want to control your own destiny through being self-employed in New Zealand. New Zealand offers a really interesting pathway for people who have demonstrated they have lawfully earned or acquired those funds which they wish to invest in the country. There's effectively two sub-pathways. One demands a minimum investment of New Zealand dollars 5 million or New Zealand dollars 10 million. If you choose to invest $5 million in New Zealand, that investment must be held for 3 years in the country, and at that point in time, your resident visa will be made unconditional. The second is the $10 million investment, and those people must maintain their investment for 5 years. So what's the difference between the $5 million and the $10 million investment? Very broadly, and this is very high level, the whole idea of the first category is to put your money to work in a New Zealand business enterprise. And so we're talking about private equity, private credit, New Zealand managed funds, New Zealand equities. It's that kind of stuff. So this is not about you building a house with your money. It's not about you transferring your S&P 500 portfolio and being based in New Zealand. This pathway, and 80% of applicants so far have chosen this pathway, is about putting your money to work for New Zealand businesses. Now again, it's not as simple as that. There's a number of tests that are applied before your resident visa is going to be conditionally approved. You must demonstrate, for example, you are a fit and proper person. And that goes to character, your business background, history of bankruptcy, or otherwise. You must prove that the money that you intend investing in New Zealand was lawfully earned or acquired. Basically, the government will verify every dollar that you nominate for investment in New Zealand is clean, for want of a better term. In terms of the process, you will file a resident visa application and you will list those assets, and it could be hard, illiquid, or liquid assets, that you intend in time transferring and investing in New Zealand for your 3 or 5 year period. And once the government has approved in principle your application, you have 6 months in which to transfer through the banking system or a recognised foreign exchange service only those funds that you have nominated and make your investment in New Zealand. Now, 6 months actually is not a long time for most people to liquidate the assets and or move the money and identify and make the investments in New Zealand. Now, the immigration rules, or instructions as we call them, does allow for a one-off extension of 6 months if there are, quote, compelling, unquote, reasons why you could not make the transfer within the allotted time. Really, really important to understand the clock is ticking. So before you file your application, you really do need to be in a position of having identified precisely what you're going to invest in. Now, in terms of what you can invest in, there's currently a list of around 100 approved by government products. And so the wealth management industry have all lobbied very hard to get their products on this list. So you have a lot of choice. A couple of points about the investments you make, however. Number one, the government does not guarantee you won't lose your shirt and you won't lose every dollar. Number two, and this has been expressed to me by a number of wealth managers very quietly who are selling these products, New Zealand is a small place, and finding investments that meet the requirement that the government wants, the outcomes the government wishes to achieve, and keeping you happy as an investor can be quite difficult. So you do need to understand the risks and the rewards. Those of you going down this $5 million, no two ways about it, more risky pathway. Now, if at the end of your 3 years, and you will have a resident visa, The value of your investment has dropped. You do not need to top it up. Any losses are your losses. The second point I would make is that during the investment period, your income from your New Zealand investments are yours to keep. And during that 3-year period, you can swap and sell in and out of various approved investments. But there are some very strict rules about time to reinvest money that you might have liquidated. And again, precisely what you invest in. Now, investors are allowed to buy themselves or build a house to the value of $5 million on top of the $5 or $10 million that you are investing. Now, very briefly on the $10 million route, this is less risky, but as I said earlier, 5-year investment horizon. But this is what the government is calling balanced funds. Honestly, it's passive. We're talking about government bonds and that sort of thing, which is guaranteed by the government. But 80% are going for the lower level, even though it's more risky, and around 20% are going for the higher level, even though it's less risky. And if you want to know why 3 years for the higher risk, the growth pathway versus the more passive balanced, it's simply to encourage more of you to go down the active investment route. There is no age cap here. You can be 110. If you're still going strong, you'll qualify. There is also no English language requirement level involved in the process anymore. So this is a really good option. You don't have to spend a lot of time in the country after you've got your residency, if you don't choose to. That, of course, has tax implications. And that's something else I would add in closing on this part of the explanation around these two pathways. Be aware that you will almost certainly in time become a tax resident of New Zealand, and that has some consequences. So you need to look beyond simply that first 3, 4, 5-year time horizon and how you make the investments, secure and maintain your residency, and have a jolly good think about what the tax consequences might be. The visa matrix, so what actually is it? Well, this is what goes inside my head when I'm sitting down strategizing with clients on how to get you up this mountain that you want to climb. And like every good professional mountain guide who's been up this mountain many, many times before you with other people, I have a plan. I have a plan A, I normally have a plan B, and where possible, a plan C or D. And that's not because I necessarily think that the strategy that we've outlined for you won't work, but because every good mountain guide has a different pathway if something happens that is out of our collective control. The rules change, there's a pandemic, one of you loses your job, your personal circumstances change, your health changes. All of these things can collapse any strategy we have in place. So this slide is designed to illustrate what goes on inside my head in terms of a strategy. And this is the reason why my colleagues and I, over nearly 4 decades of providing this advice to clients from all over the world under many, many different pathways, is just shy of 100%. No one's perfect. There are things that we simply can't control. But the bottom line here is, if you do what we tell you to do, and we've got some contingency planning built in, there is no reason to suggest that you won't get residents of New Zealand one way or the other. I cannot sit here and look you in the eye and guarantee with absolute certainty that residency is going to be approved. But we are very, very good at what we do. Very good. And our record of success is second to none. And this is how we do it, not just because we know the rules, but by having contingency plans in place. The work that we do at Imagine is incredibly important. It is literally life-changing. We cannot afford to make a mistake. There is literally no margin for error because, as I've explained in this video, the government of New Zealand or Australia will not give you residency because you got it 98% right. This is an all or nothing game. And it comes down sometimes literally to minutes in the day. And I'm going to give you an example, and it's literally today we've just resolved a situation and pulled the guy out of the fire. So bear with me, but it's worth understanding and appreciating the expertise that we bring. But more than that, the relationships we have with senior people inside Immigration New Zealand in particular. Because without those relationships, developed and fostered over 37 years, what we've just been able to do for a client would never have happened. And I generally believe there's very few others in this industry who could have pulled off what my team has just done. Client very shortly turns 54, literally in 24 hours from today. He has to start working, and he must work for 24 months before he's eligible to apply for a resident visa. And in 24 months and 2 days, he turns 56, and he must file his resident visa under the age of 56, so when he's still 55, or he does not qualify for residency. 2 weeks ago, we filed a work visa. We actually got him a job offer. And he had some criminal convictions, drink driving basically. Not normally a deal breaker, but they do cause significant delays when immigration officers assess character. So we had approximately 11 days to file this work visa, get it approved, and get him working so that we retain his ability to apply for residency no more than 1 day before he turns 56. So we made our legal arguments, and it went into the system. We then went up the food chain with Immigration New Zealand and said, hey guys, this is really urgent. Here's why. Will you pull this thing out of the pile for us? Well, there was a bit of disinterest shown at the counter level. And the clock was ticking, and we've gone up the food chain. And then literally 24 hours ago, we discovered the case officer inside immigration processing this thing is on leave. And inside Immigration New Zealand, when your case officer goes on leave, no one else picks up the file. The application literally sits there until they get back. Well, in this case, that's the end of this guy's move to New Zealand. So we spoke to a very senior manager 24 hours ago. That manager got in touch with another branch manager. And that branch manager reassigned the application to a new officer and said, give this thing priority. Through the course of yesterday, not much seemed to happen. So we made another couple of phone calls. And then this morning, we learned via the employer, Immigration New Zealand had been on the telephone to him asking him questions. Bizarre, because all those questions should have been answered before the government effectively invited this guy to file his work visa. Anyway, c'est la vie. Character is a very important issue. Now, this guy could easily be declined a work visa because of these 2 drink driving convictions. But as I said a couple of minutes ago, not normally a deal breaker, but a delaying factor. So we got on to the relationship manager that we deal with earlier this morning and said, listen, this thing hasn't been approved. This guy's bought a $4,000 non-refundable, $4,000 US non-refundable airline ticket to get here tomorrow. So we've got approximately 45 minutes left, 45 minutes for this thing to be approved, or he's going to lose the money, he's going to lose the job, and he's going to lose the one chance he's got of spending the rest of his days in New Zealand. Well, with about 15 minutes to spare, the Immigration Department has told us they're satisfied that he's of good character and that all their concerns have been addressed and mitigated. This guy now got his work visa. Literally 15 minutes to spare in what is a 3-year strategy to get the guy into New Zealand. And right there is the value that we bring. It's not just knowing the rules. It's being able to leverage the relationships that we have inside these government departments to get stuff done when things really need to get done. So you pay us not just to plan and execute the strategy, but to minimize the chances that your life is going to fall apart because of a visa application. And the team and I are very, very good at that. And I couldn't give you a better example of one that is literally today and been solved. So I hope that's a good example of just where the value comes if you decide to retain someone like Imagine. So where to from here? First of all, congratulations. If you've just sat through this whole video, you actually need a medal. We should dish you out a visa just for doing it. I hope it's been informative and it's put some meat on the bones for those of you who have already completed one of our free preliminary feedback reports on your visa eligibility. But still, it's not the whole story. I need now to sit down with you and probably spend 60, 90, maybe even 120 minutes putting even more meat on the bone. So the next step is to book a consultation with me or one of the senior team. And at that consultation, we're going to explain in greater detail the strategies we've put in place, the timelines, the costs, what are the risks. But more than anything else, it's going to give you a chance to ask all the questions that you need to know so that you can make a balanced decision on whether migrating to New Zealand or Australia is the thing for you and your family, whether emotionally you're up to it, whether financially you can afford it, whether in terms of employability you are employable. And I will say it again in closing, as I said at the very beginning of this presentation, we will tell you what you need to know and not what you want to hear. Do yourselves a favor, book the consultation. I don't get rich out of consultations, but it gives me a chance to demonstrate in great detail exactly what we've got in mind for you and the family. So I hope you've enjoyed watching this. I hope it's been useful, and I look forward to hearing from you in the fullness of time.